It's Levi Brackman here with Truths, Jewish Wisdom for today. This is the Torah portion uncensored, part of this podcast. And today we are talking about two Torah portions, Vayelech and Ha'azinu, at the end of Deuteronomy, at the end of Devarim. And what I'm going to focus on today is what I think is a fascinating difference in the way God is said to react when the Israelites do not follow him and instead choose to follow other gods. So let's take a look at the Torah portion of Vayelech, and let's have a look inside what it says. So we're talking about Perek Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Tes Zayin, chapter 31, verse 6. And it says, V'yom Hashem al Moshe, and God said to Moses, Hincha shoichev im avisecha, you will sleep with your fathers. In other words, you're going to die. V'kom ha'am hazeh v'zona achrei Elohei nechar ha'aretz. And this people will rise up, and they will go astray after what he describes in the text here as Elohei nechar ha'aretz, which means the gods which are foreign of the land. In other words, the land's foreign gods. And there's a lot of discussion about what does this term mean. And one of the explanations which is given is found in Drashas Haran, which is the Ran Rabbeinu Nissim, the medieval commentator on the Talmud. And he explains in his expoundation or his exegesis, this means that there are types of gods which have dominion over foreign lands, but they do not have dominion over the land of Israel, and certainly not of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. So when the Jewish people need to go into the land of Israel, they need to, at that point, only accept the dominion of the Holy One, blessed be He, the God of Israel. But God says that He knows that after a time, they will abandon Him, in other words, the God of Israel, and they will start to go after these other foreign gods, which these other foreign gods seem to have dominion over other lands. So they will go astray after the Elohei nechar ha'aretz, asher hu v'shama b'kirboy, that He goes there inside them. V'ozavani, and they will forsake me. V'heifer esprisi, and I will break my covenant, asher karati itoi, that I have made with them. So what is happening here? He says, as we mentioned, that God says, I know that you're going to die. And then this people are going to get up and they're going to go after Elohei nechar ha'aretz, asher hu v'shama b'kirbo, that they come there inside it, which means that this is the foreign gods of that land. In other words, prior to the Israelites taking over the land of Israel, there were non-Jews there. And those non-Jews, they were serving foreign gods. And so what God is saying is that He knows that over time, these people, the Israelites in other words, they're going to forsake me, in other words, the God of Israel, and they're going to start serving the foreign gods of the foreign people. In other words, those people who used to live there, and they served these foreign gods foreign to the land of Israel, the Israelites are now going to follow those foreign gods. Now, next pasuk, the next verse, Pasuk Yud Zayin, V'chari afi boi b'yemahu, and then my anger will be kindled against them on that day, Ba'azavtim, and I will forsake them, V'histarti ponai mehem, and I will hide my face from them, V'hoyo le'echol, and they will be for food, for eating, Umatza'uhu rois rabis v'tzaris, and lots of bad and distress will find them. V'ama b'yemahu, and they will say on that day, Haloi al ki'ein Elohai b'kirbi, is it not because there is no God within me, but only harois ela, that this bad has found us. And then in verse 18 it says, V'anoichi haster astir ponai b'yemahu, and I will surely hide my face on that day, al kol hara, on all the bad asher asa that is done, kifono el Elohim acherim, because they turned to other gods. Now, what's striking about this is that this is a depiction of God that isn't actively wrathful. It isn't a God that is actively vengeful. It's a God which is saying that if the Israelites go after, and he's predicting they will, go after these Elohei Nechar Haaretz, these gods which are foreign to the land, then he's just going to withdraw his face from them. He's going to hide from them. And when he does that, bad will befall them. Now, that is striking when you compare that to other parts of the Torah, and we're not going to go through every single one of them, but the teichachas, the rebukes, which are found in other sections, where God is actively punishing the Israelites. But let's go into just one chapter later in Ha'azinu, how it is described there. In this song, which is the Song of Ha'azinu, the Shira, we find in Pasuk Tesvav, so this is now chapter 32, Perek Lamed Beis, verse 15. It talks about all the good things that will happen, and then there's like a pivot in the text, and it says, Vayishman Yeshurun, but Yeshurun became fat. Vayivot, and kicked. Shamanta, you became fat. Avisa, you grew thick. Kasisa, you became covered. Vayitoish Eloi a soul, and you forsook the God that made you. Vayinabel tzur Yeshuasai, and he made disgusting the rock of his salvation. Yakniuhu bezarim, they roused in him jealousy with strange gods. But soyevos yachisuhu, they provoked him with abominations, etc. Yizchul Hashedim, they sacrificed demons, lo elahab, which was not gods, Elohim, lo yudom, gods that they did not know, Chadashim, new gods, Mikarev boyo, lately came up from them, Loi sa'orum avisechem, that your fathers did not have fear from, did not dread. And then, verse 19, Pasuk Yutes, it says, God's reaction to all of that. Vayar Hashem vayinotz, and God saw this and spurned them, because of the anger provoked by his sons and daughters. Vayomer, and he says, God said, in other words, Astir upon mehem, I will hide my face from them. Similar to what we said in the previous chapter. Erema achrisam, I will see what the end shall be. Kidoi ta'apuchesema bonim loy emun bom, because they are a generation that has turned things on their head. They are sons who are not faithful. And then jump to verse 22. Ki eish kot chaviapi, for a fire is kindled in my nostrils. Vatikait ad shal tachtis, and it burns until the depth of the netherworld. Vatoichel eretz yivula, and it will devour the earth and everything which is in it and all its produce. Vatalayit moiste harim, and it sets ablaze the foundations of the mountains. And then verse 23. Asper lemoy rois, I will heap upon them bad things. Chitzaya chaleba, my arrows will destroy them. Mizei rov, and the wasting of hunger. Ulchumei reshef, and the battles of demons. The ketev meridian, the destruction of meriri, vishain behemos, and the teeth of beasts. Ashalech bam, I will send upon them. Im chamas richeli offer, with the venom of crawling things of the dust, etc., etc. So here we see God actively destroying the Israelites. In other words, now we find the vengeful God. Not just a God which is sitting back and allowing the bad to happen, but this is a God which is actively destroying the Israelites. This is a distinction between the depiction of God who says, look, I'm just going to withdraw my protection, and a God which says, I'm actually going to actively do something because you forsook me. I'm going to destroy you because you have forgotten me. Two depictions of God. And now, if anyone's watched any mafia movies, etc., one might see a kind of a mafia boss going on here. One is perhaps a God which is like the mafia boss might show up and say, look, you need my protection. And you know what? If you don't pay up, you're going to lose my protection. When you lose my protection, bad things can happen. Your store might burn down. You might get knocked over by a car. So just be careful. Continue paying for my protection and everything will be fine. And then you have a mafia boss who you're already involved with the mafia. And at that point, if you cross him, the gloves are off, right? There's real retribution which is going to take place. And that seems to be the two models that we have here. One, which is found in Vayelech in chapter 31, which is God saying, look, I know what's going to happen in the future. You're going to go after other gods. And at that point, I'm going to hide myself from you. That's it. No more protection. And with no more protection, I'm sorry, but bad things can happen. In fact, bad things are going to happen. Whereas the other God, which we find in Ha'azinu and many of the Teichachas, is a God which is saying, not only are bad things going to happen, I'm going to do bad things to you because you forsook me. So we have this dichotomy of God, the way it's described in the Torah itself. Literally, one chapter is this and one chapter is that. And there are different ways in which you can explain it. One might say that Ha'azinu is more a song sung by the Israelites. One's from, if you like, the perception of God, and one is from the perception of the people. So from God's perspective, he's saying, look, I'm not necessarily hurting you. I'm just not watching. What happened when God didn't watch when the Israelites were in Egypt? Bad things happened. 400 years of slavery. Real suffering. So when you're not under my protection, bad things happen. How does that feel, though, from the people of God? How does that feel? It feels like God's doing that to us. It feels like God's hurting us. So it could be, one might argue, although this is perhaps difficult to fit into the text, that the Vayelech, chapter 31, is from the perspective of God. From God's perspective, he's not actively hurting the Israelites. He's just saying, look, I'm going to just withdraw my protection. From the perspective of the Israelites, though, it doesn't just feel like the protection is withdrawn. It feels like God's actively hurting them. Because without God's protection, they just get hurt. It's interesting also, and this was pointed out to me by my friend Yehuda Ber Zerkin, that what is the opposite of God hiding his face from them? The opposite of that is Yor Hashem Panav Elecha, which is found in the Birchas Kohanim, in the blessing which is made by the priests, where the priests bless the Israelites that God's face shall shine upon the Israelites. And in Mishlei, in the Proverbs, there's a pasuk which says, B'oy pnei melech chayim, that with the light of the face of the king is life. In other words, when the king, God's face, is light, in other words, shining upon people, that's when life comes about. And you can understand the opposite, that there's death when the face of the king is not shining. You also find a commentary on Yor Hashem Panav Elecha, that the countenance of God should shine upon you, in other words, the Israelites. That is the commentaries like the Ur Chaim, which is the 16th century rabbi called Chaim ibn Attar. He says that this is the idea that there shouldn't be a curtain between God and the Israelites and the Jewish people. In other words, there shouldn't be anything which is blocking God's radiance or God's providence from coming down upon the Israelites. And that is the blessing which is given. And why is there a need for God's radiance? Because when God's radiance isn't there, then the opposite of life can happen and you end up with death. So there's this idea which is found, at least from God's perspective, that when God is not shining his light, then bad things happen. So the God which is actively offering retribution, which is actively vengeful against the Israelites for abandoning him, is found a lot in the Hebrew Bible. And often when I read it, I find it a very challenging perspective of God. Because we find in the text itself, it seems to foretell that this is certainly going to happen. Let's just review that it says in chapter 31, Perek Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Tes Zayin, where it says, V'kama amazeh, and this people will rise up. It's foretelling. This will happen. V'zon achrei Elhei b'nei haaretz, and they will go astray after Elhei b'nei haaretz. And then later on it says, Pasuk Chaf Aleph, verse 21 of the same chapter, Ki yodaiti, God says, because I know, es yitzroi, their inclination, asher hu oisa hayoim, that they even do now, today, b'terem avien el aretz shishbati, that my fathers know this. I know that these are people who are going to do these things. I know the inclination. I know their nature. They're going to go astray. And then again, in verse 20, Pasuk Chav says, Ki avienu el ha'adam asher nishpat la'avosav, when I will bring them into the land that I swore to their fathers, Zavas chalav v'dvash, the land which is flowing with milk and honey, v'achal v'sava, and they will eat and they will become satisfied, v'dashin, and they'll become fat, ufana ela elahim acherim v'avadum, and they will turn to other gods, and they will serve them. V'niyatsuni, and they will despise me. V'heifres brisi, and they'll break my covenant. This is something which I know which is going to happen. In other words, this is foretold. It's predicted. And if it's predicted, specifically if it's predicted by God, what kind of choice is there? It's going to happen. And therefore, when you see the God, which is very vengeful, it doesn't feel right. Because God knows this is going to happen. This is the people he's chosen. These are a people which go astray. They have this in their inclination. They have this as part of their nature. And God says, Ki yodati, because I know that this is who they are, and this is going to happen. So why the vengefulness? But the God which is depicted in Vayelech seems to be a more reasonable, rational God, which says, look, there's a two-way street here. When they serve me, when the Israelites turn towards me, I turn towards them, and they have my protection. When they turn away, then I hide from them, and they don't have my protection, and bad things happen. That is a much more palatable God. This is more of a God which is passive. He's saying, look, I'll be active when you're active. But when you're not active, then I'm passive. It's not that I'm going out to hurt you, it's just that I'm not engaged with protecting you. This seems to me, in many ways, a duality of how God is depicted in the texts of the Torah itself. And I've had this conversation with Yehuda Ber Zerkin this week, and he pointed out to me that there are some people who see the Torah as a book of Machshavas Yisrael, of Jewish thought as it progressed throughout the ages. And certainly people who see the Torah as a text which evolved over time, they could see this as a text which has different variations of different thoughts about God which evolved. And therefore these texts are actually giving us different perspectives of different ways different authors perhaps thought about God in different time points. And then they were put together, and when they were put together, they were then threaded together to feel like it's all one whole, but one can tell the differences of perspectives, if one reads them carefully, of the way these different authors saw and perceived God. That's one way, certainly a way in which Bible scholars will look at it. But one could also say that this is just giving two perspectives of God. One from the perspective of God, one from the perspective of the people singing this song. So from the perspective of God, again, it's not God necessarily doing something actively to hurt the Israelites. And the Torah is actually said by Moses. So when it's said by Moses, rather than said by God himself, therefore it's going to have a particular stringent feeling to it that this is God doing it, because it feels like it's God doing it. What's the difference? God could protect us and is not protecting us. In a sense, that's God now hurting us. But from God's perspective, it's not him hurting us, it's him just withdrawing his protection. And perhaps that could be maybe more of a traditional way of looking at it, of these two different perspectives of God in Vayelech and God in Ha'azinu. Now, this can seem, for those people who are believers, very, very relevant to what's going on today when the Jews have the land of Israel and are living there, how to see the perspective of the protection of God over the Jewish people in the land of Israel, and what one needs to do in order to gain that protection. And especially the land of Israel being a place where it's important that the Israelites actually keep true to their own morals and ethics as found in the Torah, and not follow the moral and ethics of the people who follow foreign gods. To make this more relevant to the world we live in today, which is a post-October 7th world. It's been a year since that terrible massacre. And one of the things which I found challenging from a theological perspective as I've read the Torah over the last year, specifically the books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Devarim, is we find that the protection of God comes about when we serve the God of Israel. And most Jews who are religious serve the God of Israel today. But so do the Muslims. The Muslims serve the same God as we serve. So if the Muslims serve the same God as we serve, then why do we deserve the protection of God any more than the Muslims deserve the protection of God? And here I would argue that, and this is something which came up, and a thought process which has come to mind through a discussion that I had with my nephew Menachem Latowitz, and that is that the serving of other gods doesn't just mean serving another god which isn't the God of Israel. It comes with it a whole set of morals and ethics that is part and parcel of serving the God of Israel. In other words, serving the God of Israel isn't just serving the one God, the monotheistic God. It's also following the God of Israel's morals and ethics. It's kadoshim tiyu, you should be holy, ki kadeshani, because I am holy. How does one serve God? One serves God by being holy like God is holy, like following the moral and ethical laws which are given to us by the God of Israel. So you could technically say I'm serving God, but actually be serving another God, because one might argue fundamental to serving the God of Israel is following the moral and ethical laws as given to us by the God of Israel, following the Torah. If you're an army which hides behind your own civilians, if you're an army which when you go to battle, you maim, rape, kill, burn alive, etc., and take joy in that, you're showing that you're not serving the God of Israel. Because serving the God of Israel, having God of Israel as centrality in your life, cannot be separated from the moral and ethics which come together with serving God of Israel. And serving Elahei B'nei Ha'aretz, that is living a different moral and ethical life. So it is incumbent upon the Jewish people, the Israelites, the Israelis, the Jews who live in the land of Israel, to take that to heart, that following God isn't just blowing the shofar before battle or saying a prayer, studying the Torah. It's also living up to the kinds of moral and ethics which the Torah demands of us. And those include things like loving the stranger, and includes things like being charitable, being merciful, etc. And all those things, which is part and parcel of being a Jewish person and emulating God, and to be holy because God himself, our God, the God of Israel, is holy. And as long as the Jewish people continue going forward in that way, they will have the protection of God, and the others who behave in a barbaric fashion to their own people and to their enemies won't have that protection. Because Yar Hashem panav elecha, because the face of God should shine upon you, upon the Israelites. May that happen, and may it continue to happen for now and forever. This has been Levi Brackman with Truths, Jewish Wisdom for Today. Thank you so much for joining.